Now we're in James chapter 2, verse 6. Reading from the King James Version, quote, "But ye have despised the poor. Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats?" Unquote. Notice Parisis from the Greek. But ye have despised. Now, have despised is used only one time in the King James Version in the New Testament. It's used 3 times in the Hebrew, but only once in the Greek. So let's look at this. Have despised is used in an aorist tense, so no regards to time and space, active voice, so it's you, and indicative mood, which means that it's a fact. The poor. Now, James uses the poor 3 different times, but it is plain as can be. We know what it means. Do not rich men. Rich men is used 5 times in the King James Version, 4 times in the Greek. Luke uses it in Luke 21, verse 1, quote, "And he looked up and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury," unquote. James uses it here. He also uses it in James 5:1, quote, "Go to now, ye rich men, weep and howl for your miseries. They shall come upon you," unquote. And lastly, it's used by John in Revelation 6:15. "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman, and every free man, hide themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains," unquote. So it's pretty plain to see what the rich men are. Next, oppress. Let's go ahead and look at that as far as the Greek. It's in the present tense, so it's now. It's an active voice, it's you. And it's indicative, which means that it's a fact. Going forward. You and draw you before the judgment seats. Now, the judgment seats is only used 1 time in the King James Version. It's here, and this is it. I want to point out something that when it says draw you before the judgment seats, what it meant, looking this up, defining draw, it means dragged. They drag you into. Now let's look and see what John Gill has to say on this. Quote, "But ye have despised the poor," unquote, or dishonored and reproached them, by showing respect to persons, and preferring the rich to them, and in distinguishing them in such a manner as was to their contempt and injury, which is a reproaching not only of them, but their Maker, and is in effect saying that God has done either a weak or a wrong thing, in choosing them to be rich in faith and heirs of a kingdom, it being directly contrary to his conduct. Quote, "Do not rich men oppress you and draw you before the judgment seats?" Unquote. Which may be understood either of rich men, they were unbelievers, and these either the heathen magistrates who ruled over them in a tyrannical manner, and with rigor, and often summoned them before them and persecuted them with violence, or their own countrymen, the Jews, who stirred up the chief men of the Gentiles against them, and drew them to their judgment seats, as they drew Paul to the judgment seat of Galilee. Acts chapter 13, verse 50. Quote, "But the Jews stirred up the devout and honorable women, and the chief men of the city, and raised persecution against Paul and Barnabas, and expelled them out of their coast," unquote. Or else of the rich professors of religion, who assumed a despotical power over the poor brethren of the church, and loved to have the preeminence over them, as Diapolis did, and set up tribunes in the church, and tried and condemned them in an arbitrary way, or else upon civil accounts, had them before the heathen magistrates, and went to law with them in their courts before unbelievers, which is a practice condemned by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 1. Quote, "Dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unjust, and not before the saints?" Unquote. And seeing now rich men use them so ill, the apostle mentions this as an argument to dissuade them from respect of persons, seeing they had but little reason to show so much regard unto them, who had treated them in so evil a manner. This is not to be understood of all rich men, nor is the apostle's design to destroy that natural and civil order there is among men, by reason of their different stations, offices, and circumstances, it being highly proper that honor should be given to whom honor is due, but not to the dishonor of another. This ends John Gill's commentary of James chapter 2, verse 6. And thank you for being with Discovering the Scriptures. May God richly bless you on your journey.